All right, I'm going to use the mic. If you don't hear me well, feel free to raise your hand. We're not a very large room, so I don't see it being a problem. For those who I haven't met before, my name is Mark Schreiber. I think I've met pretty much everyone in the room before. So this intent of this is to be pretty casual. I want you to get as much out of this session as possible, but I also want to have a dialogue about this. I'm going to do a presentation that I have given with my partners at both ASIS Annual Seminar and ISC West, and I'm about to give a version of this at ISC East. So I've had the opportunity to get it out into the wild, so to speak, and share knowledge. But within this community here, there's a lot of knowledge, and I want to be extremely respectful of that. I want to hear from you, your experiences as we go through this, especially at the end. That being said, I'm cramming a lot of information within this time frame. So I'm going to go through it very quickly. If anything, you don't understand or you didn't catch, raise your hand. I'll pause. We'll review it. But I want to disseminate as much information first, and then go through kind of discussion efforts so we can all learn from each other. So I can calibrate. First off, how many in the room are pilots, licensed pilots to fly aircraft? Okay.
In progress.
In progress. How many actually own a drone and have flown a drone before? All right. And how many have actually deployed some type of drone solution, whether it's drone operation or counter drone detection solution for a client?
In the process.
In the process. Excellent. Great. So that means to me that what I'm going to cover is going to be a lot of great value. Maybe you might know half of this, but I'm going to go through it quickly again. If there's any questions, let me know, and I'll be more than happy to go over these items. Let's turn this on. We're a physical security engineering company. I'm a physical security engineering consultant. I'm going to talk about products in this. I'm not endorsing any product. This is what I've gathered. Here's some examples. There are a lot of companies out there with big VC marketing budgets that you've probably heard of. There's just as many garage band type products, and there's a lot of military products out there. I'm going to give you kind of a cross section. This is not comprehensive, and I'm going to talk about these products, but again, it's not to endorse anyone, it's just to give you that. I expect everyone in this room, as a professional, to do their own research and validate anything accordingly. All you need to know about me, obviously engineering background, worked for Fording, a very large engineering construction company, then went out independently. So my focus is always about physical engineering, providing those right technical solutions for my clients, not law enforcement, not military background operation. So how did I get into drones? It was very organic. Through my local ASIS chapter, I met a company, an individual who was starting a drone services company who had a law enforcement background, and so that piqued my interest. We had discussions, and I talked to him about, well, how would you apply this to the security industry? That evolved into some very interesting strategic opportunities. We did a presentation for a local chapter, which then turned into the ASIS International Seminar, then ISC West, and so on and so forth. So essentially, myself and my partners have been giving kind of doing this research and giving this information out to the industry, because there's so many questions, so much new technology, new implications, that we just felt that the industry really needed to know that. I'm heavily involved within ASIS, currently ASIS Council Vice President, so if you have any ASIS questions, feel free to ping me, but I know a lot of other folks have volunteered for ASIS in the past. So what I want to talk about in this case is, first off, just the basics of drones. So drones about history, technology, drones about rules, regulation, and enforcement, and this comes from my partners and their expertise. And then the last third or half of this program effectively is about security implications and impact, security applications and impact of drones. Really quick in history and technology, drones go by many different names. The official technical name is UAS, Unmanned Aerial System, but there's also UAV and all of these other terms depending on what agency you're working on. But what has happened is the term of drone has effectively become ubiquitous and standardized for every application. So we've kind of adopted that unless we're talking technical terms and breaking that out. Drones come in many sizes, shapes, and factors. So what the public knew as drones was something like the Global Hawk. What we're talking about is drones in their smaller size, as small as this, Pico quadcopter, which effectively is almost invisible in an operational environment. And that really falls into the classification of Small Unmanned Aircraft System, SUAS, which is less than 55 pounds overall, including its payload. So these are small drones, but these are the items that are much more prevalent. These are the ones that are being sold in the thousands daily, and eventually will get to tens of thousands and more so very shortly. They typically have a top speed of less than 100 miles per hour, which means that's still very fast, right? Very fast for applications. We'll talk about that. History of that, if you don't know, drones have been around since World War II. They're originally actually set up for kamikaze bombing missions, where they're remote controlled aircraft taking on bombers, and the pilot would eject. There's a great story about the Kennedys' involvement in that. But effectively, this has been used to fly aircraft and aircraft as targets for fighter jets and so on and so forth, up until modern day, where they're actually becoming fully controllable, auto-leveling, and autonomous, which I'll touch on. Drones typically follow two basic technologies: rotorcraft, like helicopters, or fixed wing. But there's also other special versions and hybrids, such as the VTOL here. You're going to see dirigibles, right, which are getting classified as drones because they were always that kind of oddball, but they can fit within drone categorization. Solar powered, all types of technologies of drones. But what you'll want to keep track of is what's classified as tethered drones. And these are drones where there's literally a cable that connects that drone to the ground. Why is that important? Because effectively it has unlimited flight time, right? It's not depending upon a single battery. It can fly up. So when we talk about security operations, we want that persistent capability of a drone as a tool for us, and a tethered capability will provide that. So you can go look at altitudes of up to 500 feet with tethered solutions. Example is solar-powered UAV, 30,000 feet. I mean, we're talking about significant aircraft here. They can fly 9+ hours in certain cases. The range of these capabilities is extensive, so don't think that these are your toy drones, especially as some people in the industry are kind of talking about drones. Drones can be very capable things. It's about the dependency of the budget of your clients, the budget of the bad actors accordingly. The advancements right now that's really driving what we're seeing as drones today is batteries. The miniaturization extension of batteries is really what's giving drones that capability to propel them beyond RC aircraft, and the processing power. Now you can literally have the drones do full aerial calculations as operating and fly essentially as a simple automatic car to the pilot versus the very technical aspects that an RC aircraft pilot would have to do, or a full aircraft pilot. GPS stabilization, again, very little piloting skill. And then we're seeing the adoption of machine learning and artificial intelligence now coming into play. The payload, what the sensors it can actually carry, is just as good, if not better, than what we see in commercial security, right? So the same level of high megapixel camera, same level of sensors, they can be carried as a payload because they've been miniaturized, and these aircraft can be very large to carry these payloads if need be. So the limitations essentially have fallen away, which is what makes drones really popular solutions right now. The autonomous flight features, self-leveling, hovering, where you just let go of the controls and it will stay in place. Controlled flight, again, autonomous takeoff and landing, so you don't even have to worry about the difficulty in taking off and landing. Fail-safe, if it loses its connections, communications, it will just fly back home. So there's safeties built into that in addition to the automatic flight. Follow me capability, that's essentially where I can tag a subject, tag myself as a pilot, and tell the drone to just follow me. And as I walk, as I bike, as I drive around, the drone will just follow me through that. You can think of security controls where that would be beneficial, right? Waypoint navigation has been around for a while. That's essentially go here, go here, go here, purely based on GPS coordinates, which is built in. And then we're talking about how do we take that autonomy and go into the future. Well, there's even a Chinese company right now that actually has a full unmanned rotorcraft for passengers. So just think like self-driving cars. This is a self-driving drone. You just get into it, it takes off, flies wherever your program destination is. You don't touch anything. Now, this is all pretty, bleeding edge for sure, but if they've got proof of concept and selling it, that means that there's some legitimacy to that. Now, for those who have not experienced drones, there's a lot of misconceptions on their capability, and just like any new technology, we tend to go to one extreme or another. Drones are nothing, right? They're the kid's toy, they're not effective. Drones are everything in the world, they're the best things in sliced bread, they're going to be everywhere. As we know, the reality is it's always somewhere in the middle, right? So you'll see a lot of YouTube videos, a lot of television shows that talk about drones and their capabilities. Understand a lot of that is doctored. A lot of that has been put in Adobe Photoshop or it's special effects. But if you look at some real actual evidence like this video I'm going to show you, where you actually see the display from the control, that's the kind of information you want to understand their capability. They are fast and very controllable. So I'm going to show you an example of this. This impacts our industry because what we're talking about is actually video from a criminal. Someone who actually used a drone illegally for illegal purposes, but it does give you an example. So obviously, I'm not condoning or supporting this behavior, but it does give an example of the threat out there. Does anybody have vertigo? Deal with vertigo? If you do, please just close your eyes for about 2 minutes before watching this video. So effectively, this is someone who's joyriding essentially a racing UAV near an operating train. So they decide they're going to fly next to the train, go under the train, flip over, go back down the train while it's still moving, right? This is full speed, and fly into the car. And look at the quality of the video, right? Did you see the readings of the wall? I'm not obviously condoning this, but this is a good example of the capability of the drone in how many seconds was that, right? So if our...
So that's all bad.
That's all bad. Okay. All bad, all legal. All legal, right? So, but if that's what the threat actor that we're facing is capable of doing, how do we address that threat, right? How do we address that concern? Well, unfortunately, as I'll talk about, the deck is stacked against us. But things are hopefully changing for the better. Drones are affecting many, many industries. This is actually a short list. So it doesn't matter that whether we're in the security industry or other industries, everybody is dealing with the impact of drones, not necessarily as a threat, sometimes as a tool. So what you're going to learn today, is not just applicable to security, it can be applicable to your client's operations. What's the market? Potentially huge. $2 billion today, and these are old numbers, by 2020, $127 billion is what's projected. Granted, take it with a grain of salt, but that is a huge factor there. 70,000 jobs. I question that number because that's projecting direct certain jobs. There's a lot of indirect jobs that would be based on that. The salary, that's debatable too, but it depends on what level of capability you're doing. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. All right, so rules, regulations, and enforcement. What can we expect, from our local authorities to be able to deal with this drone threat? Unfortunately, not much now, but that is drastically changing. Don't break on me here. First off, the FAA classifies drone operators in 3 categories, and this is going to be key for the legal ramifications going forward. First off is hobbyists. Hobbyist is everyone else that is not a commercial operator or public operator. So the hobbyist is someone who buys their drone at Best Buy, goes and flies their backyard, has fun, tinkers with it. Commercial operator, that is, be very careful, any flight that generates value. If I take a drone and I fly it up and look at the rooftop of one of my client's facilities, is that going to generate value for me? That's commercial operations. So make sure you're aware of that. Don't go into drone applications for your own use safely. This will go away. Public operator, that is your government agencies. That's your law enforcement, that's your federal government solutions that are going to be using it for their applications. They have a special category because they're going to get special permissions, but also have certain expectations accordingly. Hobbyists require that they follow a community-based set of guidelines. They notify airport, air traffic control, and other restricted areas within 5 miles of the airport, and they register themselves and their aircraft. This is just like radios, traditional GMRS radios. It's, hey, please notify us when you buy these radios, and please abide by our rules, but we have no means of detecting proper behavior. Right, versus a true shortwave radio operator who does have to get a license, who does have to follow through that. So hobbyist is right now the biggest threat we're seeing on a regular basis, on a frequency basis, because they're ignorant, right? They just got a new toy, they're going out and they're flying in a park or some unused area that they think is legitimate, when in reality they're not reading the rules, they're not following the instructions, and causing problems. So California, the wildfires, huge problem right now because hobbyists want to go see these wildfires that are spreading across. They're flying these drones and they're interfering with the actual, fire rescue aircraft, which they have to down their planes because there's a dangerous environment, causing the fires to go further. Right, this is a problem. Commercial operators, as I said before, this is someone who actually plans to use it for value. Commercial operators used to have a full pilot's license and go through 333 waiver to support drone operations. Now they can go through the new Part 107 operation, which is essentially a study, exam, and they get their special license to operate commercially. If you plan to use drones in your operations, make sure you go through that. I suggest you go through it now while it's relatively easy. And then there's a lot of rules for the drone aircraft that they can fly, specifically the 400 feet above ground level ceiling. Everything needs to stay below that so you're not interfering with commercial aircraft. Visual line of sight is very important right now, and that is a big factor. You're not allowed to fly a drone, whether a hobbyist or commercially, without being able to visually see that drone in the air at all times. Once it goes out of sight, you've effectively broken the law, lose your license, and may not be able to fly ever again. So this is a big factor with operational impact. And just like
is that unassisted, like the
yes,
binocular?
currently it is interpreted as unassisted, as you're using your human eyesight. Great question. And then the public, just to be aware, they have their own special rules accordingly. So if you work with agencies, they may have their own drone operations and they'll have their own separate licensing. Registration, again, is just registration. It's just making sure you're identifying your aircraft and yourself. Right now, as in March, which is way out of date, 770,000 drones have been registered. What are we at now? Easily over 1 million. Easily over 1 million. And right now, the fines are effectively up to 250,000 max for criminal. 27,000 civil fines. Not a huge cost impact.
What do you estimate the number of unregistered drones?
Good question. I don't have enough criteria to identify what's unregistered. I'd say, tens of thousands in the US alone. That does bring up a good question. How many people actually support operations outside of the US? Okay. Everything I'm focusing on today is US-based, federal law-based. When you go outside of the US, it's a totally different territory. We have areas that, like clients I'm talking with, they have no regulations whatsoever. They can fly and do whatever they want to. And in certain areas, it's very severe, strict regulations. So make sure you go through that understanding. This is U.S. based for the majority of the audiences of operations. But I mean, unregistered, I don't know. I think there is a cottage industry of unlicensed drones, and frankly, you can build your own drone. I mean, there's a gentleman here who actually built his own drone, right? It doesn't take much to do that. So there's no controls, there's no guarantees of that currently, so stop that. So yes, a bad actor is going to build his own drone, build a heavy drone, heavy payload. We'll go into that. Airspace classification, for those who don't know, there's multiple levels of classification. We're talking about for small UAS is Class G, which is 700 above ground level height and below. So that's your ceiling. Again, they're restricted to 400 feet. And so this is the area between your restricted areas, your airports, your federal spaces, Disney World, things like that, that you're not allowed to fly in general. Then you have to be around, at the ground level below that. All of the commercial airspace above that is off limits for legal operations. And then who regulates it? It's the FAA. They treat, what I want to make sure it's clear, they treat drones just like aircraft. There's no difference between a small UAS that weighs 5 pounds and a 747 under current FAA guidelines right now. So they do not want you to mess with drones as per their charter. That is changing hopefully very soon.
Sorry, does that mean you have to submit a flight plan with them if you're operating commercially?
If you are operating commercially, right, the rules for a commercial drone operator do not require you to fly a flight plan, but you can fly NOTAMs if you're working in near controlled space areas, and there's tools to provide that. That is becoming an industry factor too. There's a potential that FAA may require NOTAMs for all drones over a certain weight limit, or all drones who are in a certain area. That is being deliberated right now.
NOTAM.
So,
What was that? Notice to airmen. Notice to airmen.
oh yeah, NOTAMs is notice to airmen. So that way you're notifying all the other traffic in your area about your flight plan.
One question, that classification, I've heard that limits what you can do with a drone that's flying over your property or over a client's facility as far as bringing it down or...
I'll get into that.
Okay.
I'll get into it. All right, so what does this mean? Our skies effectively are going to become crowded. Not like, plagues of locusts, but we're going to see drones flying over our space frequently. Think of like your commercial aircraft you currently see, times 100, right? You're going to be seeing drones flying locally around that space. So Amazon has actually put forth a plan that's actually taking some traction, is now you have a 200 feet limit ceiling for local traffic, which is just going within your region, and then between 200 feet and 400 feet is high-speed transit, where they're going longer distances, higher speed, essentially separating this area even further. That's under deliberation right now and gaining some serious traction. What can local law enforcement do? Effectively, their laws right now have nothing to do with drones. So what they're going to be concerned about is damage to property, damage to persons. They will not enforce drone laws that even potentially exist currently because it's so ambiguous right now with the environment. But the FAA has recognized that law enforcement is going to have to support this, and so therefore they're identifying the value of training in this. You're looking for destruction of private property, trespassing, restraining orders, keeping calm impacts, and property damage. That's where they have some teeth, but even still, they're going to be reluctant to try and, to try and incarcerate and prosecute accordingly to that because drones are still such a legal gray area. Commercial and personal privacy, this was the area that got a lot of press and a lot of discussion about, but effectively there really aren't any laws that prevent a drone from flying over your property and using a video camera to see what's going on in your backyard. Because the expectation of privacy doesn't necessarily apply to those spaces. Because if you have a fence that's chain link, do you have an expectation that there's privacy in the backyard when you're out there, barbecuing? No, because you put in a chain link fence. Well, if you have an expectation of privacy in your backyard and the drone is now flying 100 feet above ground, viewing over you, well, it was the onus upon you as an individual to actually put up a tent or put up a shed or something like that to prevent that from happening. That is the current law. Again, this is all subject to change. So right now, the cases of privacy concerns, such as the shotgun dad, who decided to take his shotgun out at the pool when his daughter was sunbathing and a drone flew over his backyard and he blew it out of the sky, guess what? The favor went to the drone operator, not the dad, because he destroyed public private property. He had to deal with a fine. Someone also threw a t-shirt and damaged one. They were charged with criminal damage. Grandma threw a rock in Pennsylvania and had to pay $600 to get the charges fine. So the legal support for the individual versus the drone operator is not really there yet. State actions are in play right now. They're proposing it, but right now the federal requirements under the FAA trump state regulations. State regulations do not subsede the current FAA rules, so they've been thrown out effectively by the judges when they're actually taken to the Supreme Courts. But that is changing. So that now I keep saying that. What is changing? So right now, literally on legislation is a proposal which is endorsed by the current administration, supposedly, that they're going to change it so the FAA laws apply at 200 feet or 400 feet and above, not below. And everything below is local jurisdiction based. So if your city, your state, your village wants to say drones are not allowed, they have that capability. Or say drones must do this, must register, must license, must XYZ, they'll have full capability to do that. Why is that happening? The FAA has been dealing with this drone headache for a long time, and they realize they don't have the manpower, the legal capability to really kind of slice and dice this as it should be. So effectively that's like, we'll push the problem down to the state level, which constitutionally is supported, and then they can let the locals figure that out accordingly. Plus there's been a lot of precedent to do this. And so that's one potential case, and then there's also special waivers. So CNN just received a waiver that allows them to fly drones over crowds in public spaces, which was previously unauthorized. So now you're going to start seeing news reporter drones flying over these spaces, and so they're going to have to carry a huge insurance liability, because if they drop that drone on someone's head, you can imagine the lawsuit that will cause that, but now they're giving that special exception to that. So that's all just happened within the last week. Dave?
Does that mean that a homeowners association can say this is a no-fly zone?
If their local jurisdiction will support that, after this law gets passed. Again, this is all hearsay right now. This has not even been,
So if a homeowners association might be able to do it, then a homeowner.
Or just the local. If the local city says homeowners have the right to privacy of their own property, they control the airspace up to 400 feet, they can pass that law too. That allows us to do that. I can't really answer that question thoroughly at this point because the legal environment is changing too much here. Assumption is federal will fall under FAA no matter what the agency is. And the local agencies will fall in turn, but there's going to be some state variations, just like anything. So great, now we know about drones and their capabilities. What about them as a security threat and a security tool or security asset? I was asked to talk about drones specifically, but I don't want to ignore the fact of UGVs or robots. What we're dealing with in this technology is essentially multiple applications of technologies coming to the same place. We're talking about platforms, right? So vehicle-based platforms, aerial-based platforms in the case of drones. Then you take it on top of that, the capability to operate autonomously, right? Which is what a robot can do and what drones are now about to do. And then the multiple sensor platforms that they are. Cameras, microphones, radar, PIRs, all the same, it's all in that case. So take the same kind of points I'm taking and apply that to robotics, and don't ignore that. In fact, what I want to point out with UGVs, they don't have the regulations that drones do. Less danger and impact and damage, easier to deploy because of that, and then they're easier to supply with security operations. So look into that accordingly. So as a threat, a drone we have several known incidents. White House trespass in 2015, and that was actually a governmental employee who's joy flying and crashed it on the White House lawn. Savannah River, we had multiple overflights of the nuclear weapons complex. And the Bangor Naval Base trespass in February of last year. This was also repeated overflights of this very secure facility, which has already been restricted for all aircraft, not just drones, for many years. And the offender only flew at night. I'm sure that wasn't suspicious at all, right? So what did those tell us? First off, this is a threat, right? This trespass at a minimum is a threat. It spun up security operations at all of these facilities significantly. They realized that they were caught flat-footed, didn't have the operations, didn't have detection, didn't have real capabilities. I assume they didn't have detection. Obviously, they may not reveal that. You know, and so they're now adjusting accordingly, just as commercial security should. So right now, contraband delivery is a big factor for correctional facilities. How many folks support correctional facilities, right? I'm sure you're talking about this right now. Interesting case happened in Ohio in July 2015. The attempt was to bring in drugs, tobacco via drone, contraband delivery. They intended to fly into the yard where they knew that their friend was going to be, and drop it in his hands, and then he could quickly hide it. Unfortunately, the drone came in, caused chaos, dropped the package, caused an immediate brawl. They had to lock down the prison, go through all the procedures. Okay, so this was a effectively $500 drone carrying how much in the contraband, and how much effort and time did the prison have to deal with this set, and how often could this happen potentially, right? So we have these cases where the threat is trying more and more and learning and adapting accordingly. Serious threat. Luckily, the intention wasn't really bad, but the actual impact was significant. In April 2015, so this has been a while now, right? A individual whose family was involved in the Fukushima nuclear accident actually took nuclear radioactive sand as the payload and dropped it on the Japanese Prime Minister's home. Could have been, something more dangerous, could have had more, but the fact that they were able to do that and land it on the house, is this precedent, right? Bad actor. It was someone that was actually caught under a sting, luckily. The intent was to take potentially multiple drones and carry C4 into the Pentagon. Well, I can't substantiate how likely or feasible that was for them, but clearly we have a precedent for the case, and luckily that was part of the sting. And then obviously what Mr. Norman talked about today, the ISIS bombings right now, they're a real threat for the military, and unfortunately this is spreading. They're actually taking grenades, mortars, other types of explosive devices, and dropping them easily with drones, commercial-based drones themselves. The fixed wing UAVs is most likely what this is using because it can create the distance, but rotorcraft are just as capable of doing this solution too. So what we're concerned about as a threat is specifically the methodology of this risk. So first off is surveillance intelligence gathering. So in addition to standard video cameras, just as the same 100 megapixel security cameras, they're capable of bringing in LiDAR. So the same LiDAR technology we use to map out facilities, prepare for construction, is actually an active payload on these drones. So they're using in this video here to actually identify this facility, this stadium. But you can imagine what this would be in the hands, of a threat. This bad actor could come in and recon a facility and get detailed information, right? As you can see, this is a signpost, that's the sign. The individual parking signs, the trees, the door, that is detailed information that LiDAR can gather. And this can be done totally at night, pitch black. Who is going to detect that actually flying over? You know, especially when they put it at altitude of 100 feet, no one on the ground is probably going to even hear it, even if they're doing security patrols.
Are there any devices that will detect the sound?
We'll get into that. And then there is the actual overlay mapping, right? You take your aerial maps, your LiDAR capability, your GPS topography, you tie that together, and you've got a very complete picture of the environment you're working in. So the other threats we have is trespassing. You know, so essentially flying in spaces when they shouldn't be, and obviously that is the you know, a very common concern itself. Event interruption and espionage. So when we talk about the contraband delivery itself, you know, we're talking about narcotics transportation, we're talking about the potential infiltration of the prisons, and then weaponization of them themselves, whether it's explosives, firearms, or even a very you know, potentially lethal situation is biological sprayers, using those for, you know, chemical, biological attacks. Very easy payload, because essentially they're using the same types of sprayers that they use for fertilizer. You just change what the contents are, and now you've got a very serious weapon. What you may have seen is the quote-unquote flying gun video, where they took a semi-automatic handgun and attached it to a drone. You know, proof of concept, you know, you're able to mechanically manipulate this and fire semi-accurately, you know, if you provide that, and of course the ISIS bombings. So there is no potential lack of this, you know, threat. You can effectively provide the damaging payload you want. You're just limited to pounds versus hundreds of pounds currently. So you have to make sure that you're addressing that threat. So just like with every type of risk management, when we're dealing this with our clients, we want to identify what really is going to be at risk. What is their profile going to incite, and what kind of bad actors are they likely to encounter, and then address that drone threat accordingly. So we're going to look at different countermeasures, solutions, counter drone solutions themselves, and effectively you'll see them line up with technologies we're already familiar with, but now they're payloads on a new transport mechanism. So instead of being a fixed or mobile asset, you know, vehicle mobile asset, now it's something that can fly at 50 miles per hour, zoom into a premises above all the physical perimeters we've got in place, you know, enact its damage, and then fly away. So radar is one of the most likely solutions we're looking at, especially the compact radars that we're seeing from, you know, Spotter RF, Griffin, Detect, thermal imaging radar, taking that military grade radar, miniaturizing it for commercial applications, and then using analytics to identify that this is a drone flying in the space versus a bird. They've made some significant improvements on that and tested pretty well on that so far. You tie that in with your existing situational awareness. You know, now you have that geospatial information, tie that in with your video cameras. You can use pan tilt zoom automated to track that and overlay the analytics accordingly, as the video showed. What's interesting to note is the picture here is the sensor profile is a little different than what we're used to seeing. Because instead of it being, you know, a bubble or a flat ellipse or circle on the ground level, horizontal, it's actually tilted up at like a 45-degree angle to try and capture the most of that space. So when you look into these solutions, make sure you understand those sensor capabilities and profiles accordingly. The next most common technology we're seeing is radio frequency sensors. Because the UAV, the drone flying in the air, emits radio frequencies on its own, and because it's emitting communications via RF to the control station, to the pilot who's controlling it, we're able to detect those unique radio frequencies with advanced sensors accordingly. And so those are deployed in, simple antenna platforms or advanced antenna platforms, complemented with video, so you're tracking as you're running through that. Directional antennas that can be passive or active RF to detect this. Again, they have to be configured and programmed to support drones specifically. Otherwise, it's very difficult for them to detect from a lot of the small flying objects we call birds that most radars are ignoring typically.
It brings up one question. Under any of the regulations, are they going to be limiting the bandwidth that drones can occupy or use under a licensing mechanism?
They currently are. They currently are falling under traditional FCC guidelines on what there are. And that's what makes this job easier for them, is they're only looking for certain spectrums.
But the person
But again, a bad actor
right.
is not going to be following FCC regulations necessarily. They might stick to that because they're buying commercial off-the-shelf components. But, and a really advanced actor is going to create their own, frequency, probably fly in, government spectrum, military government spectrum to give them the longest range and capability accordingly. So that threat will evolve, I'm sure, depending on the actor. Yeah.
But the FAA and CFR are referencing FCC regulations.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, all FCC regulations are in effect here. Great question. And then again, what's your threat profile? Are you dealing with a nation state? Yes, that's a concern. Are you dealing with a common criminal who happens to have a drone? Much easier to detect in that solution itself. And then a neat little variation on RF is what DTEC did. I just want to point this out, is this, again, confluence, this convergence of technologies, is they actually were able to take the common sensors in most smartphones and build an app that would use the RF detectors to actually detect drones by aggregating multiple smartphones together, crowdsourcing those together. And once it started identifying this unique RF signature across multiple phones, they could triangulate that and say, I think this is a drone. Now, feasibility, validity of how accurate this is going to be, that's up for us to determine. But it's really interesting how all these technologies are applying. And then the question was about microphones. I can't remember who asked that comment. Microphones. That was you, Dave, right? Yeah. So there are acoustical sensors, microphones with advanced audio analytics that have been tried with drones. And what they're actually doing is determining the unique acoustic signature that the propellers make on rotorcraft, or the propellers on fixed wing of these propellers. Can you imagine the challenge? Now you have to do a signature for every single type of drone made. And then fixed wing glider aircraft don't make those sounds. So I'm not, again, not promoting or trying to degrade anybody. Yeah, it's not the dominant. Yeah. But D-Drone, which is one of the most known names, tried that and essentially jettisoned, because they could not get enough consistent accuracy with those acoustical sensors. So I'm not devaluing that technology. It is there, it has been tried, but it's a harder, level of education and testing to validate that appropriately.
Is it prohibitive to just use scrambling radio frequencies?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
So for example, I showed D-Drone in their drone tracker. That actually should be scratched out, because essentially they're only applying that to very custom solutions. They have gone down the path of RF, but Drone Shield does have a solution based on acoustical sensors. So just beware, be careful about that solution. Back to radar, we have solutions where we're talking about large area radar, where we're taking truly military transportation grade radar and applying that with advanced analytics to detect drones. Those are going up to 5 kilometers. So right now we have 2 airports. I forgot what the 2 locations are. 2 different airports are deploying this right now specifically for drone detection capabilities. So the market is there, their development is there. It's just we don't have the accuracy, the FAR/NAR numbers we want right now. And then what do we do about intervention? How do we actually prevent the drones, not just detect, but prevent? Well, we're back to RF. So radio frequency is now to be able to detect. So we have certain solutions such as the TAL and Drone Shield using directional jammers on platforms that are familiar to high security environments. And they can uniquely point at the drone, interrupt its signal, and bring it down or send it to return to home with that type of application. What's the problem here? This is directly interfering with the current allowable frequencies in that environment. So this is not for commercial use. This is currently only applied in military environments with special exceptions, some agreement by the FAA that's not public. So if you're looking at this type of intervention with your clients, make sure that they're the right type of client, make sure that they're working with their agencies appropriately for special approvals or outside of the US. That's where we're seeing a lot more traction is outside of the US applications for this. Nets, why not? Let's throw a net on a drone. If you were at ISC West, you saw one vendor there who had a drone that shot a net. This is the Skywall solution from OpenWorks, the British firm, which shoots a projectile that opens the net, and then the net has its actual parachute to bring the drone down safely, not let it destroy itself upon the ground. Airspace systems, there's multiple capabilities to that. So that's great, the fact that it's a more contained solution, right? You're not interfering with the frequencies, you're not going to be likely damaging other things in the air if you aim it properly, but then you're dealing with some potential capability issues, because how high in the air can that drone gun shoot, right? How far in that? So whether you're flying a drone that shoots out a net, you're flying whether you're shooting it out of a platform, essentially a paintball gun, you've got limitations there you're going to be capable about, manual intervention capability. Now, one that actually is going to get some smirks, but actually has some potential, is raptors, animals. Because they can actually train hawks or other raptors, falconry, to actually capture the drone and bring it back to you. It's like working with canines, right? You have controlled means, you have training. That hawk is not going to go up and interfere with other aircraft. It's not going to attack other things that you wouldn't train it to, and it will bring the drone back to you. The downside is it's like dealing with canines, It's a difficult environment, a lot of investment, specialized handling, not to mention the maintenance and care of the animals. So we have solutions that actually started with the Dutch police, the company, the example is called Guard from Above. So I can see how this might take some traction for those environments where you really need to capture or stop that threat, and you're dealing within the current laws and limitations. Now, back to RF again. You see this trend here. We now have proof of concept, and we now have solutions where they're taking advanced RF in a larger area space and not only using it for detection of drones, but actually drone interruption and drone control. So this example is from a company called Department 13. Surveyor, I think, also has a solution too. Effectively, that RF capability will use same type of cyber principles. Identify this is a drone, this is a known drone communications, and I'm going to intervent that control string coming from the pilot, take it over and give it our own controls because we already have that signature and that knowledge, and send it to the direction we want to, whether it's send it away from our facility or send it to a controlled capture area for capture and forensics information. So this is very heartening, but it is currently illegal under FCC rules. I see this common trend here. So let's pause here. What do we talk about with forensics? If you were actually able to capture a drone, whether it was identified on your property or it was actually brought down legally or illegally on your facility, what can you do with it? Well, they didn't design the drones for forensics or law enforcement support. They actually build in the drones a memory chip which is glued thankfully, thanks guys, into the device inside the PCB. So effectively, you have to destroy the drone to get at the information on the drone itself. So if you have this case, bring in an expert. Bring in a drone expert, have them disassemble it with law enforcement partnership so they can take all the forensics immediately and create that chain of custody we need. But if they do that successfully, we will have the GPS information, the waypoints, all the flight information on what they just last flew. And hopefully, if it's a dumb criminal, they actually have all the previous flights that they've done, including their home address, their base of operations on the drone itself. All that information is resident on those devices, that telemetry, maybe even their registration if they're that bad, on the drone itself. So there's a lot of information you can get, but it's not something that should be done lightly. You need to make sure you use professionals. What about drones as a tool? Not dealing with drones as a threat, but a tool as itself. Well, the great thing is they use the same platforms we're familiar with. So we can use those same sensors in the same applications we can, but instead of being fixed on a post or fixed on a building, it's now mobile. It's now able to move at 50 miles per hour around our facility. So Indigo Vision, which some of us are familiar with, has actually done a proof of concept with their VMS and tied in drone video into their VMS. So as you see this video here, it's flying, sending that video directly back in through their VMS. So you have your fixed security cameras and you have your drone video tied in to your VMS accordingly.
Rough idea of the flight time available on them?
Well, it depends on the drone. So you're going to get from an hour to 9 hours depending on the drone. Again, back to tethered, if this is our operations, tethered might be appropriate because then it's like we have a 100-foot pole in the air that we can actually move back and forth, several feet if we want to, if that's the need. But what is the application? Fit the drone solution to the application. If it's perimeter patrol, tether doesn't make sense. But you can define a restricted perimeter and make it fly that constantly, and keep recharging and replenishing the drones accordingly. Hikvision also has a solution that I'm just basically familiar with, but I've not seen any real video from that yet. And obviously we're all familiar with them and they're here. So what can we do with that? General surveillance, situational awareness, guard tour. Why not do a drone guard tour, right? Much faster, larger area of space. You don't have the human capability though. And then the other applications is response, right? You have an incident on your property. How quickly can you respond to it? Well, a drone flying at 50, 70, 100 miles an hour can get there much quicker than a security officer can. So if you don't already have eyes on that through video surveillance or personnel, a drone makes great sense there.
Anyone interfacing with like an access control system that would give coordinates to a drone to respond
Try a
to?
different version. No. So great point, and
So like
I just showed. I've been
remote gate
searching for 2 years now, talking to every VMS I can. Are you dealing with drones? Are you interfacing video from drones? And this is the only examples I have right now today, which is shocking to me. So if you guys feel there's validity, ask them too. Because if they hear from everybody in this room, they're definitely going to do something about it. Everything I hear is our skunk works, our R&D has been playing with it, they're testing it. And it's great because I can take, my partner, he can actually pull video from a drone, he can put it on, he can show it on the internet. You can actually now control drones across the cloud. So I can sit here and control a drone flying in China if I want to. It's not getting the video, it's getting the telemetry. It's getting that geospatial information about where the drone is exactly flying, where it's looking, where it's pointing. That is the information we need as security practitioners, and nobody is doing that yet. But I think it's just a matter of time. Yes? Someone know that they're doing it.
When I went to Security Exchange in Utah a couple months ago, I took the meetings with manufacturers on Kasana and integrated. And I took meetings with manufacturers of perimeter intrusion detection systems, and I figured I'd put the cheese where I want the mice to go. And I said, all these systems and all these hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars we've installed for, whether the wall is 6 foot, 10 foot, Donald Trump height, doesn't matter. So what are you doing to leverage the processors and sensors that you have, whether it's fence mounted or what have you, with regional, their active perimeter, where you have more ability to have detection capability. As I said, we need that detection. We need to have the ability to detect, and even potentially deter above that. So I think they're all getting that message, that particularly in their space, they need to come up with solutions on that. Because the reality is true. These expensive perimeter detection intrusion systems are basically been moving.
Well, to the drone threat, right? Exactly, to the drone threat. To a vehicle-borne explosive, they make perfect sense, right? But to a drone threat, not so much. And that's what we're all kind of reeling from. We all have to adapt accordingly. But yeah, absolutely. Use the current infrastructure, use the current sensor systems to try and encapsulate that. And kind of back to my panel point yesterday, effectively, 20 years from now, sensors are going to be ubiquitous, right? We're just going to say put a security package here, a security package here, and it's going to have a combination of sensors, and then we configure and apply those sensors accordingly. So exactly your point, we're going to have perimeter packages all over the place, and then apply that whether it's doing drone detection below, fence jumping below, local area detection, typical PIDA stuff on the same location, communications, video, so on and so forth. Yeah, exactly.
So what you're describing actually does happen in Europe now. We have several cases, but it's police operated. It's public safety, less than security. So there's combinations of drones and balloons happening at the same time. The challenge here, though, is manpower, typically, and the cost for the commercial grade, like a Nightingale, for example, which has, they'll fly to home, continue to charge, and then go back up, but the cost is $50,000, $60,000, and those can actually respond to alarms and alerts. But it's cost prohibitive, plus everybody's waiting for regulations on what they can actually do.
Right.
So in Chicago, they're trying to do it to deploy to cover rail yards, especially at night, basically have a trained path that they'll fly over. The problem is they can't get approval, and the senior management doesn't want to pull any strings to try to make that happen. So, and it's a $50,000, $60,000 pop to get something that can go up and go at a moment's notice and then come back, recharge, and not have a person be with it at all times.
Yeah, exactly, and that you make a great point that overseas they're more advanced with drone solutions than we are in the U.S., which seems counterintuitive, but it's because of the legal barriers that are in place. And they're a little bit quicker to work with between law enforcement and their government in some other countries, just because of the way the laws are in our Constitution. So effectively, we're going to see things come from over there, overseas to here. But I think once they define the new legal approach, it's going to be the floodgates are open, and then we're going to see a lot of applications in the U.S. quickly.
They started 2 years ago being able to do this because they operate under a state of emergency now. So the government is bypassing their regulations because of it, because they consider the threat to be too high. So even in Paris and big cities, they're doing it. The problem is they're able to circumvent policy and go right above all of it.
Very good point. Ben, do you have a question?
Well, some of them that you've seen haven't come up in gear yet, but it's following through the military history here when you start looking at detection, interdiction, and using as a response capability, identify threat control capability. When you're having a mixture of your own response force that you're going to send out to assist your responders, when that drone shows up, is it your guy or is it somebody else's? Is it another threat? Same way with your detection goes. Have you seen any of that incorporated into any platforms as yet?
Not yet, not yet. And that's, and what you'll see as you start talking with some of these counter drone solutions, they're invested in the security industry because that's their market. It's going to see, I mean, effectively, we're all going to be familiar with counter drone solutions in 2 years because we have a client who's asking for it. But the actual drone operations, they don't see security as a big market. They're more concerned about the transportation, the Amazons, the You know, the law enforcement, they see law enforcement a much bigger market than security. So it's going to take a while for them to figure out our environment and what our wants and needs are according to them. So to address that, eventually it'll get together. We've seen a few companies who are kind of like, yeah, we'll invest in the security industry, but I can't tell you right now who's going to be the leaders in a year.
And to that point, you know, if you had legal or positive operations going on, how many people are going to call in, hey, I saw a drone flying around the governor's mansion or the Capitol building? How would, you know, how could you use it for a positive interdiction and not trigger all kinds of concerns from the public?
Well, it's the same, right? We need to validate the information prior to response. So use that as just as you would do for any other call in of information or anything. But that's a very good point. We should have people aware of that. So the video won't play this, but this was Nightingale, as you made a comment about. So Nightingale is a solution of a drone manufacturer, but they're providing fully autonomous drone solutions. So that is, you go to them, you tell them what you want on your sensor package payload to be, you tell them what route, what your perimeter routes, what your control routes and everything, they pre-program it, and effectively it's either a manual push of a button, fly route A, B, D, or it's based on a sensor input. So now we can have a PIDAS zone sensor trigger autonomous drone response. Go out, fly, get this information, or it can be manual just as any other drone can. But again, it is currently illegal. Why is it illegal? Because it's beyond visual line of sight. Because you don't have human eyes on the drone at all times. They're playing with the rules a little. And what we're potentially seeing is as long as a human has eyes on the drone while during flight, it's capable. Then it's not legal, that's what they're trying to propose. And that might not be human eyes, it might be a video camera, security camera, watching its track accordingly to support that. Again, we're playing with legal ambiguity here. And then do not kid me, there are people who are intentionally breaking the laws with drones because their threat is worth the risk, right? They're willing to go to court, they're willing to pay fines accordingly. So you may have clients who will ask you to do that for you. It's up to you guys to determine if you'll support them or not, but it's definitely happening out there.
But the laws don't stipulate whether it leaves their legal property or not.
Right.
The laws do support, you are not allowed to fly off of private property onto public areas without following the public area rules. So whether it might be a restricted area or you're following, you know, your public notice requirements in those certain cases. But if you're flying on private property of your own or flying private property to a neighbor who you have authority to, that is legal.
Right, but no, what I'm saying is the eyes on the UAV, why within my own property do I have to follow that rule?
Oh, it's not one or the other, it's the combination of both. Regardless of where you fly, you have to have visual line of sight. But
I understand.
right. But if you
I could own airspace as long as the tallest piece of structure on my property, I don't fly above it. I could own everything below that.
yeah.
Well, you've got public easements at your home, for example, aerial easements.
At 10 feet above your house.
You can fly over,
Right.
if you got a 3-story house, 10 foot.
In high rises,
Grass.
sorry. And so the question about private property and crossing boundaries, high rises specifically, you can go up to the top of a high rise and then go several feet above it because that follows the current FAA laws. And then, but on private property, they don't want you to, as a hobbyist, cross out of your private property because they don't want people colliding drones or trespassing on their private property without approval. So it's just a collapse of the same laws we're used to, just applying now up in the air versus on the ground in that respect. So I want to point out some other capabilities. Drones themselves have a very distinct application for response, especially in hazardous situations. So I have another video I didn't have time for, and it actually showed how they responded to a truck explosion where they didn't know what chemicals were on that truck. So they sent a drone out to investigate, recon what that truck had, look at its stickers before they sent a human. In this case, it was so bad it actually melted the tractor trailer. So it was a win-win to do that. Look at those for your own client's operations. Implement them to support safety and rescue. So what I want to point out is the operations impact, right? So policies and procedures. Who has policies and procedures to address drones as a threat, right? Talk to your clients right now about that. Update their security program, update their security procedures, training. How many people are telling their security officers or guards to look up when they're doing their patrols, right? They should all be doing that now because if they validate that a drone might be a threat. What about our own designs, right? So how tall should a fence be for a drone? Right? There isn't an answer for that one, right? It's the drone is not going to be stopped by a fence. We have to look at our perimeter designs, our hardening differently. What is currently outside in yards that it's exposed to the air that a drone can see, but we were thinking, well, nobody would see it because they're on the other side of a fence or a wall or standoff distance, right? You got to think about that. So operations will be impacted accordingly, design will be impacted. Where do we maybe need to put up shelters just to cover equipment, material that we don't want an adversary to know, right? But now we're taking that satellite imagery concern and bringing it down to a 50 foot above ground level concern. Do you need to move people indoors if a drone is detected? Right? Do you need to design your 20-story window so now if a drone's flying outside, it can't see, intellectual property, information on computer screens, all so on and so forth, everything we've been concerned at the ground level, but now with drone impact can take advantage of it. One of the other threats is the cyber converged threat. I think Tom tried to illustrate that earlier today, is a drone can be a cyber delivery package too. So they've already proven that a drone can provide Wi-Fi snooping. It flies up to a building, gets into that secured Wi-Fi network that they weren't concerned at because it was at 20 stories or it was inside the complex, land, connect to that Wi-Fi network, and then essentially do man-in-the-middle attacks at that point. So even network design, cybersecurity defense has an impact based on drones themselves. Survey areas for dropped objects, make sure you have operations for that, lockdown, access control escalation because of a drone threat. And then if you're using drones for yourselves, how do you actually write in UAS operations? How do you have drone operations supported? Do you have a console, security command relay capability? Do you have the staff to support that, or are you hiring them as a service? Again, this wide swath of impact, but a small percentage of security operations. Landing pads, power, communications are all part of that. Detection countermeasures support. All right, so overall takeaways, I'm going to read this. Again, they're emerging technology, they're bleeding edge, so treat it just like any bleeding edge solution. It has value, it has impact, it's definitely a threat. So now hopefully you're aware of that and you can talk with your clients. Please share that. I want to hear everything everyone's doing regarding drones that you can share with me because we all want to be able to communicate this and educate each other. Legislation and oversight is clearly behind the technology curve. They're not up to speed. Hopefully that will change soon, but you know how well we can expect government officials to actually be impactful. Find resources, right? You have this information, feel free to contact me. I'm more than happy to partner with organizations if you want that resource or capability. Do the research on your own. Partner with UAV companies. So when you do have a spin up, you know exactly what you're going to be doing. Everybody probably has one in their backyard. Make sure they're professional. Make sure they got license. Make sure they have experience, and look at their work. Make sure it's not something you couldn't do, in the weekends, right? Make sure they're truly legitimate in that respect. There's also national resources. The UAS Coalition is an organization I'm affiliated with. They help support UAS companies And so they now have a security focus with my involvement, so I'm more than happy to join them or support other resources. Go through security operations for appropriate planning, implementation, and staffing service resources. You can't just take a regular guard and say, you're going to now be a UAS pilot, your drone pilot. Identify who's the appropriate person, identify what it's going to take, and if it's 24/7 operations, make sure you've got the, you know, a long distance of support accordingly. Don't ignore the legal factors. You know, talk about FAA, FCC requirements. It's very easy to want to deploy one of these things and get your clients in trouble or yourselves in trouble accordingly. So be aware of those itself. This is one of those cases where reaching out to local law enforcement beforehand is probably going to pay off in the end. And then, just like leading edge technology, be adaptable. This environment is changing quickly. So if you get stuck in one way, you're probably going to go to a dead end. You got to make sure you keep being able to adapt as the technologies adapt. Now I'd be open for Q&A, but I think we're almost at a time, so if you guys want to run to lunch, feel free, but I'll stay here if anybody has any questions.
So the other thing is you got to make sure you have a policy or procedure for your clients when they go approach a drone that is actually landed on their side.
Exactly.
Yes, you never know what's
Right.
involved.
Policy is the drone welcome or not welcome? What do we do? How do we address drones that trespass on our property, right? Those are some basics. Any other questions? Okay, I know it was a lot. I apologize for the technical glitches.
Thank you, Mark.